Story 1. A Whisper in the Ventilation.
I moved into this apartment a week ago, and at first it seemed to me that this was the perfect place to live. But last night, when the city was quiet, I heard it for the first time, a strange rustling sound coming from the depth of the ventilation shaft. It didn't sound like rats or wind. It was a rhythmic, wet sound, like someone slowly flipping through the pages of an old, soaked book right above my head. I lay in the dark, holding my breath, and felt the cold air from the grate descending on my face, bringing with it the smell of old dust and something long forgotten. Today, the sound has become louder, clearer, turning into a barely discernible whisper calling my name. I stood on the bed to get a better look at what was inside, and my heart almost jumped out of my chest. Through the narrow slits of the metal grate, eyes stared at me, pupilless, cloudy white and cold as ice. And then I saw it. A thin, unnaturally long finger with a sharp grey claw began to slowly, almost gently, poke through the bars, as if trying to touch my cheek. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was clogged with dry ashes. There was a sharp, grinding sound of metal on concrete, and the grate hung on one bolt with a bang. A darkness thicker than the night air began to flow out of the black hole, and a face appeared with it. It was distorted, the skin stretched taut over the sharp cheekbones, and the jaw hung so low that it looked broken. It didn't just come out, it flowed into my room, filling up the entire space, depriving me of a chance to escape. The whisper turned into a deafening scream right in my head. Now we're going to live here together.
Story 2. The Old Photo.
While sorting things out in the attic of my grandfather's house, I found an old Polaroid with a cassette still in it. As a joke, I pulled the trigger, taking a picture of an empty, dusty corner of the room, illuminated only by the dim light from the attic window. While the picture was developing, I felt a strange uneasiness, as if someone was standing behind me, even though I was completely alone in the house. The card gradually took on colors, but instead of an empty corner, I saw something on it that wasn't there in reality, a strange dark spot in the very center of the frame. When the image finally appeared, my hands trembled so much that I almost dropped the picture. In the photo, right in that very corner, stood a tall figure in a worn black suit. She had no face, just smooth, pale skin where her eyes and mouth should be. But that wasn't the scariest thing. In the picture, the figure was standing a few meters away from me, but in reality, the corner was still completely empty. I took another shot, hoping it was just a film defect, but in the new photo, the figure became noticeably closer to the lens.
Terrified, I pressed the button a third time, and the flash momentarily blinded me, leaving bright spots in my eyes. When I looked at the fresh picture, my scream stuck in my lungs. The figure in the photo was so close that I could make out the texture of its rotten fabric. She was standing close to me, and her pale hand was already reaching for my neck. I looked up from the photo and realized that there was no attic around me anymore, only absolute icy darkness in which I distinctly heard the sound of the camera shutter going off right behind me.
Story 3: The Night Shift at the Supermarket.
Working the night shift in a huge supermarket means getting used to the silence, which seems almost tangible. You walk between the rows, and the only sound is your own footsteps and the humming of the refrigerators, which sound like distant, monotonous singing. I usually feel like the boss here, but today it was different. I had a strong feeling that someone was hiding behind every shelf. I checked the security monitors, but they only showed empty aisles, flooded with dead white light from lamps that suddenly began to blink. I froze at the security console when I noticed something strange on the fourth monitor. In the grocery department, where there wasn't a soul a minute ago, there was now a mannequin from the clothing department. He was frozen in an unnatural position, his head tilted to one side, and his empty plastic eyes seemed to be looking directly into the camera lens. I remembered for sure that all the mannequins were mounted on stands at the other end of the building. I blinked, and the unthinkable happened on the screen. The mannequin moved a few meters closer to the camera, although I did not see the moment of its movement.
I ran out of the control room, hoping to get to the main exit, but the lights in the store began to go out one by one, plunging the rows into gray twilight. When I turned the corner, I almost ran into them. Dozens of mannequins stood in a dense crowd, blocking my way, their plastic bodies twitching in time with the flashing lights. The one closest to me slowly raised his hand, and I heard the terrifying creak of plastic on plastic. They weren't going to kill me. They wanted me to become one of them, frozen forever in that eternal, cold light of the shop windows.
Story 4: Elevator to Nowhere.
I got into the elevator of a skyscraper to go down to the lobby after a long meeting. He pressed the G button, the doors closed smoothly, and the cabin began its silent downward movement. In the mirrored walls, I saw hundreds of my reflections stretching into infinity, and this sight always hypnotized me a little. But after a couple of minutes, I realized that I had been driving for too long for the 40th floor. I looked at the scoreboard, and my heart sank with incomprehensible fear. The numbers on it did not decrease. They began to grow rapidly, exceeding the 100th floor, which never existed in this building. The elevator jerked and stopped with a thud that rattled the mirrors. Instead of the usual floor number, a blood-red symbol flashed on the board, which I had never seen before. When the doors slowly opened, I didn't see a hallway or offices behind them. There was only a vast, icy void filled with the debris of some strange structures and the distant, ominous light of dying stars. The air became thin and cold, and from that void came a sound, a low, vibrating hum that made my teeth crumble.
I frantically pressed the door closing button, but the elevator seemed to stop obeying me. A cloud of thick black smoke began to float towards me from the abyss, inside of which dozens of yellow, unblinking eyes flashed. It didn't work. It filled the space, seeping through the cracks, making it impossible for me to breathe. In the cracked mirrors, I saw my flesh begin to disappear, exposing white bones, and a creature from the void whispered directly into my mind. "Welcome to the floor of eternity. Your trip is just beginning."
The Story of Five. The old people always told me not to go out on the lake on a foggy night, but I never believed in their tales about those who wait at the bottom. I sat in my boat, surrounded by a dense wall of fog, and enjoyed the silence until the float sank under the water with such force that the boat almost capsized. I began to pull on the line, feeling incredibly heavy, as if the hook had caught not a large catfish, but a whole sunken ship. The water around the boat began to bubble, and the smell of mud, rot, and something very ancient rose from the depths, which a person should not have disturbed. When I finally brought the prey to the surface, it wasn't a fish. On a hook hung a heavy iron mask covered with black slime, resembling the face of some kind of prehistoric idol. Her empty eye sockets seemed infinitely deep, and thick, dark liquid oozed from her slightly open metal mouth. I wanted to throw it back, but my hands were stuck to the metal. At that moment, the water around the boat stopped being calm. Hundreds of pale, long arms began to rise from the depths, grabbing the sides of my small vessel. The boat tilted, scooping up icy water, and I realized that it wasn't me who had caught the prey, but they had caught me. The shadows under the water began to take shape. Something colossal, the size of an entire city, slowly rose to the surface, and the mask in my hands began to pulse in time with his giant heart. My hands were pulling me down into the bottomless black mouth of the lake, where there was no light or sound. The last thing I saw before the water closed over my head were thousands of similar masks resting on the bottom and waiting for their new owners.